The New York Mets have made another move to their bullpen by re-signing right-handed reliever Ryne Stanek to a one-year deal. In this video, I'm going to be going over the Ryne Stanek contract, how I feel about it, and what else the Mets need to look at when it comes to addressing this bullpen. If you like this video going over the latest Mets news, make sure to hit the like button out of the ballpark. Slide into the comment section. What are your thoughts on the Ryne Stanek deal? Do you like it? Do you not like it? What other relievers do you think the Mets should target to fill out the rest of their bullpen? And if you're new here, you want to make my day, you can subscribe. It is always greatly appreciated. And to those who are subscribed already, you know the drill. Tell a friend, tell a neighbor, tell a stranger. I mean, you can even make a Google account for your refrigerator and just call it so-and-so's fridge and make an account and subscribe. So any support I get is always greatly appreciated. So let's talk about Stanek. He definitely is a very interesting one because when you look at his regular season, he finishes with a 6.06 ERA. And his very first outing with the Mets after they acquired him at the trade deadline, he gives up 3 runs. And there were some home runs in there, and you were like, oh dear, what have the Mets done? But the thing that I liked about Stanek the most when the Mets first acquired him was his past success in the postseason. And that ended up being true again, as Stanek was very solid for the Mets in the postseason, which is saying a lot when you consider their bullpen and the amount of guys who struggled. Ryne Stanek was one of the very few guys that actually was reliable in the postseason for this team. And it's just not very common that you have relievers who year in and year out are successful in the postseason. This is something that Stanek has been doing for years in big playoff games. I mean, we're talking about World Series games, American League Championship Series games, and in the biggest moments, Stanek has come through. Now, we thought that was the case with Phil Maton too, and the Mets made the trade for him, and he had a lot of postseason experience with Tampa, and he ended up being great in the regular season and then bad in the postseason, so it was the total opposite. And you've probably heard me say this before, but I prefer the guy who is good when it matters most in the postseason than someone who has a great regular season, because the goal is to win the championship, and if the guy's not playing well in the postseason, they're not going to help you accomplish that. And it really showed how good Stanek was compared to the other options the Mets were deploying when in Game 5 of the National League Championship Series against the Dodgers, Ryne Stanek threw 2 1/3 innings, which was the most he had thrown all year long, and in the postseason, he was not pitching really more than 1 inning. So it just showed you that the Mets were like, you know what, we have got to really push Stanek, because he is our best option, and everyone else, it has been a struggle for. The only 2 guys you felt you could trust in that postseason was Edwin Diaz and Reed Garrett. Now, fortunately, the Mets have also already added AJ Minter. We talked about him a little while ago, so they're continuing to address this bullpen, and I feel like they definitely could still use some more options, because when you look at this bullpen, like we mentioned, you have Edwin Diaz, you have AJ Minter, you have Ryne Stanek. But I think one of the really big pieces for the Mets, at least I'm hoping, is Daniel Nunez. Now, as we know, Nunez finished the regular season injured and was not available for the postseason. But this year, when he pitched, he was one of the Mets' best relievers, and he was able to get a lot done. He was one of the very few not walking anybody. So he's someone that I am very intrigued by. I'm really hoping comes back from injury and looks like himself, because that would be a major boost to this bullpen that hopefully this time you would have for your postseason run. Now, with Reed Garrett, he was an interesting one because he was kind of all over the place this past season. He had his good moments, he had his bad moments, but he was good when it mattered most. I think he's someone that benefits from quite a bit of rest. He's not someone that should be pitching on back-to-back days. And what I'm hoping is that with the addition of AJ Minter, and hopefully there's more pieces, but if you have more guys you can rely on, then you don't have to overwork Reed Garrett, and you could use him much more sparingly and get more out of him, keep him more effective. Now, one of the other relievers for the Mets that was injured last season is Sean Reed-Foley. Could we see a return from him? I mean, he is someone that when he pitches, he's all right, but he gets hurt just so frequently that you can't really trust him, but I do hope that we're able to actually get a healthy season out of him. Jose Butto had some nice moments in the bullpen during the regular season, but in the playoffs, it was a struggle, from giving up some massive home runs and really almost eliminating the Mets in that Milwaukee series. I do wonder if maybe they transition Butto more into a long relief role. Since he is someone that was a starting pitcher, maybe you could just make him more of a traditional reliever and just be someone that could eat up some innings in the middle of games. And then the Mets have just a whole bunch of other options that you're really not sure what you're going to get between Huskar Brazaban, and you have Dylan Covey and Justin Hagerman and Kevin Hergert. I mean, you got a bunch of different guys in there and some others, and I'm sure that David Stearns will continue to add some more pieces. This is what he does when it comes to bullpens. It's a very smart approach where we know that A lot of times relievers, they might have a great season and you're like, oh my gosh, that guy had such a low ERA, they should sign him. And then the next season, he's nowhere near as good. Whereas the flip side, you could have a guy who wasn't all that great last year, and then he turns out to be good the next year. Relievers are just so volatile that you can never really count on it, and that's why a guy like Stanek, it's very rare where you find someone, and Minter is in this category as well, where they are consistent year in, year out, and those are the guys that you definitely sign. But then you look for these other guys that have high upside that you feel like you can get something out of them, and you sign them to minor league deals, you sign them to one-year contracts at a low value. But what you do is you sign a bunch, so you're not relying on just one or two pitchers to really make or break your bullpen. If both of them don't work out, then you're in trouble. But with this approach, you have a lot of different options. So if a few of them don't work out, but a few of them do, well, now you've filled out your bullpen, and you've done it for much cheaper and much low risk. You're not doing the contracts anymore that previous Mets regimes were doing when you gave Dellin Betances a multi-year deal and Jerry's Familia a multi-year deal. And by the time that contract is over, you're like, oh my gosh, can we get rid of this player already? Because we are done watching him. And I think one of the other things to really consider about this year's particular bullpen is by the time it's all said and done, and when we're talking about the postseason, one of the guys that could be added to the back end of that bullpen is Clay Holmes. Now, the Mets are going to start the season with Clay Holmes in the rotation and see how that goes. And if he's not able to get the job done, well, he might be in the bullpen in the regular season as well. But the scenario that I could see is that when you get to the playoffs, you're really only using 4 starters. So I could see that Clay Holmes going to the bullpen and just sticking with the rotation. Now, who those 4 starters are going to be, that's a whole nother question for a whole nother day, probably a separate video in itself. But I do hope that there is more work to be done when it comes to actually finishing off this bullpen. I do think the Mets could use some more guys. Now, of course, the team that the Mets faced in the postseason in the National League Championship Series, the Los Angeles Dodgers, they just added Kirby Yates and already added Tanner Scott, who was the top reliever on the market. And they brought back Blake Treinen, who has some of the nastiest stuff in all of baseball. So no matter what, you are not going to have a better bullpen than them. They just continue to get better and better and don't care. Another rant for another time, another video. But for the Mets, at least they're still trying to be competitive. At least they're trying to improve their team. Now, there are some other things that we might not be crazy about as far as how they're approaching certain things and maybe not bringing back certain players that has been the talk of the town. But overall, they have been taking steps to improve their team, and they are not done yet. So up next, I will have a video this Saturday, so make sure to stay tuned for that. As you know, Mets Weekly every Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern. So let me know what you think about the Ryne Stanek deal and what other videos you want to see from me. And until the next one, have a great day, and let's go Mets!